And welcome back to the Financially Simple Experience. Today, friends, we're going to have an experience. We're going to talk about risk mitigation for the RIA owner, the Registered Investment Advisor owner, or in other words, financial planning practices. Now, look, like I've mentioned several times in the past few episodes, yes, we're talking specifically to financial advisors, but the content of today's show can be directly applied to your particular business. So as we deal with risk mitigation, that's a fancy term for insurance. I wish I had a drum roll right there. Insurance. Yes, I know you're on the edge of your seat. You can't wait to talk about insurance. You woke up this morning, you're driving down the road, you're like, brother, seriously, insurance? Yeah, we've got to deal with insurance because, believe it or not, the insurance coverage that you have or don't have could drastically impact your value of your company. Let's talk through this today, and let's examine where we're at and how we're protecting our value, our net worth on the current companies that we own. You know, there's many pain points that I'm seeing right now within the marketplace, within a number of different types of businesses. We're seeing that custodians are requiring additional coverage, more coverage on errors and omissions insurance than they've required in the past. I know doctors who are having greater malpractice number in terms of an aggregate coverage amount than they have in the past. So we're starting to see requirements for additional coverage amounts increasing on multiple different industries at this point. I also am aware of individuals who have recently gone through painful experiences with regards to the lack thereof of insurance. Perhaps they had a peril that arose and they thought they had it covered, but they come to find out it wasn't covered. I'm also seeing that the cost of insurance, holy cow, it is skyrocketing like so many other things that we're facing these days. I actually was looking at the carton of eggs in the grocery store the other day, and I was amazed how my wife can keep us in budget with the price of food these days because inflation and a number of other things are just driving prices up. Insurance is not any different. So as we look at risk mitigation for you and I as business owners, we have to understand that risk management, according to Marquette University, is the continuing process of identifying, analyzing, evaluating, and treating loss exposures while monitoring risk and financial resource to mitigate the adverse effects of loss. Let's break that definition down in very simple terms. Insurance basically helps us mitigate some risk. You see, if we don't have the proper insurance in place, then we're going to end up spending hard-earned dollars out of our pocketbooks, whereas we could subrogate that or shift the risk over to an insurance company. Charles Schwab recently announced that now they're requiring all RIAs that work with Charles Schwab to carry an aggregate minimum of $1 million of errors and omissions coverage. Why? They say to protect against errors and omissions, social engineering, theft by hackers, and if applicable, theft by employees. So in the financial advisory space, we're seeing where the custodians are now demanding additional insurance coverage. I've seen it in the healthcare space where different insurance companies, different government contracts, different hospitals, et cetera, are requiring additional coverage perhaps than in the past. The reality there is if we don't cover the perils properly, we can end up with a decreased valuation. We can end up with litigation. We can end up with catastrophic business failure. We can end up with a lot of different things that are adverse to our 8-figure exit. On the other hand, if we go out and become insurance poor, we could be throwing good dollars after bad, after unnecessary expenses. So, look, I'm not a lawyer, you know that, and this is not financial advice. What we're talking about today is practical business advice from one business owner to another. Today, I want to talk through 3 major points. That is, what are the core policies that a business should have, specifically in a registered investment advisor? What are the core policies that you should consider? And how can your entity also mitigate risk? We're going to talk through that. And then how these two can apply to impacting your 8-figure exit. So with that foreground, let's dive deep into today's show. What type of policies should you and I have as business owners, specifically in the financial planning business environment? Well, one that we know that we're going to need is errors and omission. Errors and omissions insurance can help you cover your court costs, legal fees, settlements, etc. It helps you pay for the damages that somebody may have incurred. You see, without errors and omissions insurance, the cost of the liability claim could rest solely on you, the financial advisor, and or on the business. It could leave the people that we have the honor and privilege of serving in a position that was never intended to be. So errors and omissions allows us to help make wrongs right. There was a research done that said more than half of business owners view professional mistakes as a major risk to their business, yet just 20% carry professional liability coverage. So more than half think, hey, yeah, I can mess up and it could cost me some money, but only about 20% carry E&O coverage. I'm well aware of CPA firms, law firms, etc., that just do not spend money on errors and omissions insurance. Well aware of individuals like that around the country. I'm also aware of financial advisors who just refuse to pay for errors and omissions insurance. They're saying, hey, why would I pay out tens of thousands of dollars a year for coverage that I don't mess up? It's always the client's fault, or on a likelihood that it's just not going to be there. The reality is, friends, is that we all mess up. We're humans. Every one of us. Yours truly perhaps messes up more than I desire to. Yes, more than I desire to. My wife tells me about it regularly. If you don't believe any of us mess up, talk to our significant others. We're humans. And so it just makes common sense for us to carry errors and omissions insurance as financial advisors. Now, again, you may not be a financial advisor. Maybe you don't need errors and omissions. Maybe you're not in a professional job or medical field where you need what's called malpractice insurance. Maybe you don't need this. But for those of us who are in professional positions, errors and omissions is a great coverage that we need to consider. Another coverage that you might want to consider is D&O coverage, or directors and officers liability coverage. It protects the officer's personal assets. You see, sometimes if an officer messes up, then their oversight could lead them into a position where they're going to individually have to defend a claim. And so D&O insurance, as is often termed, will come alongside and help cover that officer or that director from potential mess-ups. It's in addition to errors and omission. It's there to protect the officer through a litigation claim if they're individually cited. Let's assume your name is Fred Flintstone and your financial advisory firm is called Bedrock Financial Advisors. And a client comes along and they says, hey, Mr. Flintstone, you gave me poor advice and your advice harmed me. And now an attorney involved sees that you, Mr. Flintstone, are also the owner of the company. So now they file a claim or a complaint against your company and you individually. See, this is where D&O insurance comes along to help us. There was a study cited by Schwab that broke down how D&O and E&O insurance work conjunctively to help rectify and solve potential complaints. They actually gave a study, and it said that 30% of complaints that are settled or dealt with by D&O and E&O are regulation matters. Regulation matters. 30% are regulation matters. 20% are bankruptcy. 14% is the cost of correction. In other words, we had to correct the problem. 10% is for closed-end fund matters. That's an industry-specific risk that we deal with as financial advisors. 3% is for disclosure. 3% is breach of fiduciary duty, which whenever I read the numbers, I figured breach of fiduciary duty would be much larger than it is. Surprised me. And then roughly 20% in ancillary other situations that D&O and E&O cover. So the reality is if you need in the financial advisory space E&O insurance, oftentimes for pennies on the dollars, you can couple E&O with a D&O coverage, and not only you're protecting the client, but you're also protecting you, the entrepreneur, you, the business owner. You're helping protect your individual assets. Now, once we get past the advice coverage that we deal with, now we deal with the business insurances that we have to have. And friends, I've given many, many podcasts about this in the past. I've wrote about them in both my books. More than likely, as a financial professional, you know all about these, but perhaps, just perhaps you don't. There are a few policies that you might consider. One is called a BOP, Business Overhead Policy. Business Overhead Policy. The way I describe this is kind of like a wrapper. It controls a lot of different internals. Basically, a BOP policy is a commercial insurance designed for small and medium-sized business. A BOP policy basically bundles general liability insurance and property insurance into a single policy. And by bundling the two, it could potentially reduce your costs, reduce your premiums. So let's talk about those two. General liability insurance protects against financial loss for results of bodily injury, property damage, medical expenses, libel, slander, defamation lawsuits, defending lawsuits, settlement bonds, judgments, and so on. And that's according to the Small Business Administration. So general liability coverage basically covers the general liabilities that your business can have just by being in existence. According to Tech Insurance, the vast majority of small businesses, now they're using the SBA's term there for small business, and that is businesses which less than 500 employees. So that's the vast majority of businesses in the United States. The vast majority of businesses, let's call it, purchase a general liability policy with a $1 million per occurrence limit and a $2 million aggregate limit. So for each occurrence, it'll cover $1 million, and then the aggregate is $2 million. That's the most common general liability coverage that's purchased by business owners. Now, what's interesting about this is whenever you dive into the studies, 35.2% of small business owners who were surveyed experienced an event that led to a claim in the previous year. So more than a third of business owners had a claim in the previous year or had an event which could have led to a claim in the previous year. And then when you look at medium-sized and small firms, almost half of the businesses out there experienced some sort of a claim and filed a claim in the previous 10 years. So friends, the BOP policy is perhaps the most common for us small business owners because it's bundling so much for us. But sometimes, depending on the state that you're in, depending on your specific business, you may find it where a BOP policy does not help you. A business owner policy does not help you. You need to unbundle it and you need to get standalone coverages. So for example, you may go out and purchase an individual property insurance coverage. Let's say it's you own the building, you need a coverage for the building, or maybe you're renting your space and you need renter's insurance for slip and falls, for things that can happen actually in a location. That's a standalone policy that you might consider. Another standalone policy, or sometimes you can see it coupled with a insurance package, not necessarily part of the BOP coverage, but often as an insurance package, is cybersecurity. Now, I remember decades plus ago, cybersecurity wasn't even a risk. But these days, man, if you conduct any type of internet work whatsoever, I mean, you don't even have to have a social media page. You could just be using a computer. And with today's criminals and today's cyber threats, cybersecurity insurance is a must in my book. What is cybersecurity insurance? It's basically a contract that's there to reduce the financial risk for online business activities. Let's say you're using a computer or a phone or a tablet connected to the internet. And let's say hypothetically in the financial space, you have access to websites that engage in client transactions. You can see what's called non-public information around your clients, account values, account numbers, social security numbers, date of birth, things of that nature. Man, wouldn't it be a treasure trove for a criminal to get that information and then to try to swindle, steal, do whatever they can from your clients, or hold your company's content hostage and end up demanding a ransom of some sort? This is where cybersecurity comes into play. So cybersecurity is a tech coverage that's there to help us with social engineering, theft by hackers, theft by employees, and many other provisions that work within the internet world. Man, I'm going to tell you, talk with your insurance provider about cybersecurity. Again, I know many financial firms that just avoid this insurance. And to me, the risk, this is Justin Goodbread. If we're trying to drive to an 8-figure exit, if we can spend $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, whatever the number is for your particular firm, your particular state, if we can spend a couple $1,000s to protect us from ransomware or some other threats that come through the cyber world, and it helps us secure and protect our asset, this 8-figure asset that we're trying to grow, it makes sense to deal with that. Another standalone policy that you may end up incurring, or you can add it as a rider, is what's called business disruption policy. As our team was building the content for today's show, I was looking through, I'm like, hey guys, you're missing this particular rider or a standalone business disruption policy. Let me give you an example. During COVID, I have a client of mine who had a sewage backup into their location. They're in the medical world. And so before they could see their patients, they had to get the waste cleaned up. So their business owner policy covered the cleanup. It covered the damages to the building. But they were out of business. They could not physically meet their patients for a period of about 7 weeks. Now, during the 7 weeks, they had significant costs. They still had to cover their employee's salary. They still had to pay for their mortgage. They still had to cover the light bill. They still had all the various expenses that were incurring. For the most part, they had all the expenses. During this time of closure, they had business disruption coverage. And what that policy did was it gave them income so they can maintain the business, being they were losing the income from their patients. There's been some famous business disruption claims that have happened. I remember Wimbledon not too long ago was dealing with business disruption coverage. So there's a lot of things that can happen through business disruption. To me, as a business owner, if I'm reliant on a particular location, particular venue, I can't work virtually, I have some risk involved, I would strongly consider a business disruption policy. So friends, there's a lot of coverages that we can have for our business. We're not going to dive into the personal insurance today because I've dealt with that ad nauseum, and more than likely, as a financial professional, you know all about the individual coverages you should have, like key person insurance, key disability insurance, business overhead disability coverage, things of that nature. So I don't want to deal with those in earnest today. I just want to mention them. But I do want to drive to the next point, and that is, let's talk about your business entity. You know, many financial advisors and many business owners for that matter, we just don't understand the tax code, the Internal Revenue Code. We don't understand how the entity type that which we have could impact us in the future. It could hinder our 8-figure exit. It could cause problems with the type of a merger and acquisition in the future. It could cause unnecessary taxation. So when we look at business entity selection, there is risk mitigation that we might consider. It may not be strictly financial. It could be. It may be strategic risk mitigation. So perhaps, just perhaps, I'm speaking to a group, again, financial advisors, and you're aware there are things called limited liability companies. LLCs is what we often say for short. According to Investopedia, an LLC is a business structure in the United States that protects its owners from personal responsibility for its debts or liabilities. There's a thing called a corporate veil. And a limited liability company is the most popular way in the United States to create a personal liability protection between you, the business owner, and then the activities of your business. Now, what's cool about an LLC is we can tax it a number of ways. We can tax it as a partnership, as a sole prop, as an S corp, as a C corp. You can create taxation events multiple different ways through a limited liability company. As I just mentioned, there's also the sole prop ownership, which is filed on a Schedule C. There's an S corporation, a subchapter S, and then there's a C corporation. So you have several different types of entities. You could even have a general partnership if you wanted, or a limited partnership. There's a number of ways that you can create entities around how your business is housed. For the sake of time, and given the benefit of the doubt to our financial advisors out there that you understand the nuances of each of these entities, I don't want to dive too much into their inner workings. What I will point out, though, is one key that I seem to see happen consistently, and that is this. Not many years ago, it wasn't uncommon for decent-sized businesses to set themselves up as a C corporation. The way the Internal Revenue Code read years ago, and some would argue today, is a C corporation could help us during the operation and the growth of our company through the reduction of taxes, reduction of liabilities for a number of other possibilities that a good attorney or a good CPA could articulate far better than I could at this particular point. But one thing I've noticed as of late is there are many financial advisory firms out there who want to look at a transition or an exit within the next 5, 6, 7 years, and they're positioned in this C corporation entity. As we may understand, but just for the sake of everybody's education, a C corporation is double taxed. Whenever you go to sell the assets of the company in the future, which is most common occurs in the transition of a business, is the buyer buys the assets, not the stock. Very common. Whenever you go to sell the assets of a C corporation, the company is going to pay taxes at its tax rate. Then the individual is going to pay taxes at their tax rate, which is known as double taxation. Again, friends, I'm not giving tax advice here. I'm just making some general education observations from my seat, working with many dozens, hundreds of businesses that have transitioned over the last decade of my life and my career. There's a look-back provision that if you try to change from a C Corp to an S Corp, or from a C Corp to an LLC, or from a C Corp to a sole prop or any other entity to try to avoid the double taxation, there's a period of time that If you try to sell your company within this period of time, you will revert back to this double taxation scenario. I was talking with a financial advisor who was a sole prop business. And then as they grew, their tax advisor recommended they become a C corporation. And the business exploded. And now they have the opportunity to sell their company. The offer is strong, very strong, looks very good. But whenever they pay the taxes at the corporate level because they're selling the assets out of a C Corp and they're paying the taxes on an individual level, there's very little planning that can be done to reduce the double taxation for this particular client with the current structure they're set up in as of today. And it didn't have to be that way. So if we're trying to go to an 8-figure exit, not only does insurance help us drive to that point, but our entity selection, the type of entity we are, will directly impact the exit style, quality, value, etc. as we drive forward. So let me challenge you. If you haven't spoken with a good planner, a good exit planner, or a good attorney, or a good CPA that can talk through about how you're building the 8-figure exit and where you're at along this journey and when this journey could potentially consummate, now may be the time. You say, Justin, man, this all seems expensive. Yeah, it's expensive. To cover the cost of insurance, Charles Schwab said in a benchmark study, 2021, that the IRA revenue was roughly about 1%. 1% of the RIA's revenue was spent on insurance, roughly 1%. All right, that's not too bad. It's whenever the 1% is, $15, $20, $30, $40,000, it's like, holy cow, I can't believe I wrote a check for that much, right? So according to Schwab, the proper insurance should roughly cost us about 1%. When should you assess your coverage? When it talks about insurance, I would say, you know what? I believe a good, competent insurance broker should be sitting down with their customers, which oftentimes financial advisors. We should be reviewing our policy at least annually. Every time it comes up for renewal, every time a premium comes up, I believe at that point you should be reviewing the policy. There's an old statement that says the devil's in the detail. The devil's in the detail. My insurance agent, the first time I met him, he had his policy and he had his glasses on the end of his nose, like so many would have. He had his readers on his nose and he had an orange highlighter in his hand. And he was literally reading the actual policy line by line. And anytime he came to a point he didn't understand, he highlighted it in yellow. And anytime he saw a key point, he highlighted it in orange. And then he reviewed the actual contract with me. Hey, Justin, this is what this is saying. Here's how this is going to work if this peril would happen. To me, that type of confidant, that type of advisor for us as business owners is paramount. So I believe we should be looking at our insurance coverage at least annually and realizing it's going to cost us a little bit of money. But my goodness, the risk is far greater than the reward if we don't have coverage, the proper coverage. The other side of this is if you're looking at your entity selection, I believe exit planning is good business planning. If we're trying to grow our companies to an 8-figure exit, then one of my recommendations for you is to meet with your exit team, your value team, which is typically an attorney, a CPA, a transition like a broker, M&A person involved, your financial advisor. Yes, I have a financial advisor that's not me, even though I'm a financial advisor or have been in the past. I have my outside financial advisor I get advice from, and I have an exit planner. So I met with all of them so they could help me look at my entity selection, my entity structure, making sure my documents were prepared. See, friends, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reach an 8-figure exit. That's the goal. We want an 8-figure exit. But through this process, there are many things that if we don't handle it right, could create a hiccup. I'll give you this last example and then we'll sign off for this particular episode. I have an individual that is selling their business. They have definitive docs. In other words, they've gone through the LOI phase. They've negotiated that out. They've gone through the due diligence phase, and now the definitive docs are in place. They're ready to be reviewed by attorneys and executed. Only to find out they are being sued by a client for a liability or a peril, whatever it may be, right or wrong. There's now a lawsuit in place. And this particular company did not listen to advice and did not have the right coverage in place. The minute they had to disclose a lawsuit, because it is a material change, they had to disclose it to the buyer. The buyer then reviewed the coverages yet again, and they found out that this was not covered, and they pulled the deal. Friends, we don't know what tomorrow holds. Insurance is not our enemy, it's our friend. The entity selection is not our enemy, it's an asset that helps us drive the value of our main asset. That is our business. My challenge to you is, as you drive toward this 8-figure exit, don't forget the boring things, the things that cause us pain, frustration, even talk about. May I challenge you to go and review your insurance coverage and your entity type. Talk with your advisors. If you don't know how to do this, reach out. We have advisors who can help you. Friends, this is complicated. Insurance is boring. I get it. Risk mitigation is boring. It's not the sexy part of business, but it's something that if we don't manage properly, we can end up devastating the value of our company. Until next time, friends, y'all go out and make it. You just got to make it, man. You got to make it a great day.